Welcome to the Consummate Athlete podcast, where we explore what it means to be a well-rounded, happy, goal-crushing athlete. Every week, myself, sports journalist Molly Herford, and cycling coach and kinesiologist Peter Glassford interview experts and chat through all of your training questions. We're excited to have you along for the ride. Hello. Welcome back to the Consummate Athlete podcast. Peter, how's it going?
It's going great. Yeah, we're back in our actual home, so there you go. It's nice to be home.
Kind of nice. I will admit, today I went to look at the weather for the week, and I was like, oh, we're back in Canada, so my phone has converted back to Celsius on the weather app, and I was like, oh, good, it's 2 degrees, that'll be great. And then I realized with significant amounts of sadness that no, in fact, my phone is in Fahrenheit. It is just 2 degrees Fahrenheit.
It's definitely cold.
Very cold.
But I was excited. What did they say? There's no
bad weather, only bad gear.
Right. And so my dual coat system, I got 2 Craft. Craft is a cross-country skiing brand, but they do a lot of great cycling stuff actually now. So I got 2 jackets. They did not intend them to be used like this, but I wanted to be so warm no matter what, and I'm pretty close. So I got a long coat and then a puffy coat, and I put them together, and I am warm.
We're all very happy for you.
This has been a lifelong journey, so there you go. Anything else new?
Not a ton. I mean, the reason we're back in Canada this early, people who've been listening to the show for a while know that usually we try to head somewhere a little warmer during this time of year. In fact, we actually started this podcast going on 9 years ago now when we were away in California for the winter. So, looking forward to doing that, but we're actually back because I'm doing a couple of speaking things talking about girls in sport with Strong Girl Publishing stuff. So speaking at the Athletics Ontario Race Director Conference this weekend, and another thing with elementary school teachers actually in February. So that is both exciting and intimidating and all of the feelings.
Okay, and yeah, definitely you can have Molly come and speak at your event, schools or whatever you're into. She does do that, which is fantastic. And so, yeah, there's a couple events here, which will be fun. You have a stacked calendar that overwhelms me, but you thrive with it, which is fantastic.
Something like that.
And then we had another point that I was just lost on it, but the what was it?
I don't know, dear.
Oh, okay.
Now I'm overwhelmed.
We should have had an agenda.
We do have an agenda.
Okay. So there's that. And then, I know what it was. You had a couple authors that you're announcing here with Strong Girl Publishing.
Yeah, we just announced Vanessa Coolback, which is really exciting. She's now PhD level researcher at the University of Toronto. And we're doing a series with her that's all about kind of body image and how it relates to movement and sport and stuff like that. So that's going to be another fictional series, which is, kind of really where I want to go with a lot of the Stronger Publishing stuff. So that's really exciting.
Neat. So I didn't realize that's what you're going to sort of use storytelling to get the concepts across.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. In the same way Shred Girls
because it's delicate stuff. So, I mean, sometimes it's nice to have that. Yeah. Okay.
Yes, in the same way Shred Girls is sort of fictionalized, but with kind of point of getting girls excited about bikes and getting outside and stuff. This is really helping introduce some of these more difficult, tricky to comprehend concepts around body image and self-empowerment and self-compassion and all of that good stuff. So we're working away on that. And actually 2 other exciting announcements are coming down the pipe. Actually, you know what? Let's go with you heard it here first, because I think it's going to be out. Basically,
we should have had an agenda.
Should have had an agenda. No, when this episode airs, it'll be a couple days before I actually put it out. But we're putting out Shred Girls Book 4. The long-awaited Shred Girls are back. To be honest, I didn't really know if I was going to continue the series after Book 3. But actually, we'll get into it in a couple weeks. But I'm really excited about it. The plot really kind of came to me in a bit of an epiphany, and I'll shout out my sister Colleen for credit for turning a crap situation into an excellent plot for a book. So really, really psyched on that. And then we'll have another announcement actually in a couple more weeks. So much happening. Really, really exciting stuff. But yeah, psyched on that. A little stressed about actually kind of on our topic that we're talking about today. A little bit stressy about races coming up. Actually, Peter, you in fact have races coming up like pretty soon. And before we get into our Q&A about kind of how to prioritize races and really think about them, let's just quickly shout out our good friends, our sponsors over at Payable, before we get down any major rabbit holes. So actually, on the note of Payable, this is a really easy way to take payments within a Google form, whether you're in real life or online. So actually, when we head down to Atlanta for Peter's first race this season, I will be there with Strong Girl Publishing. I will be using a Payable form in order to take my in real life payments. And honestly, it is just the easiest way to set up a quick, oh, you need to take payments on this thing. Whether it's Girl Scout cookies, school pizza days, in my case, books. We've done jersey orders, club registrations. Kind of never-ending list of like simple things.
That's right. And you know, the one thing we like to remind or let you know is that this is one of my best friends, you know, created this product. So it's something that we stand behind and that we use personally. And so it's not just a random payments thing on the internet, but something, you know, you could have met some of this friend of mine, and then you certainly, you know us through this podcast or otherwise. So it's something we really believe in. So if you are doing something like jersey orders or registering for like a bachelorette or, you know, anything you would use a Google form for, literally, and you just need to collect some money easily and not have to chase people for it, it just works so well. Like Molly said, this could be something really small, you know, a bachelorette that happens once and it's 8 people, or again, our local cycling club here uses it and it's, you know, 1,000 members, and it just runs super simple, like much simpler than and better in a lot of ways than the more complicated like registration system. Is sort of odd, right? But sometimes you just need the right solution for the right job, and you don't need a lot of extra bells and whistles that some of these systems might have you paying for, but then also trying to like wade through.
Yeah, and we also really like there's no subscription fees or anything like that, so it's very much, you know,
you pay for what you use.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So if you want to find out more, head to payableapps.com/athlete, and we've kind of put some of our favorite templates in there. And actually, the free template library is a fantastic resource. It's pre-made Google Forms that you can then just kind of edit and append to whatever your needs are. And actually, if you're in the cycling community, you probably will, laugh, because a lot of the templates are, in fact, designed by us, so therefore geared toward endurance athletes. So again, payableapps.com/athlete. We'll include that in the show notes. Okay, so the reason I mentioned your races are coming up and race priorities are an issue is we got a great listener question. So I'll read it here. So Kyle asks, he has another listener question. He's putting together his annual training plan and Training Peaks, and as part of that, he's putting his races and events in and labeling them as A, B, and C events, which is something we talk a lot about. Seagulls. So he says, how should I be thinking about my goals for the B and C races? For the A race, I want to nail my overall performance goal. But do I use the B races to practice those same elements that I'm thinking about for my A race and not worry so much about the actual race performance? Are C races just an opportunity to participate in a fun event/race that I just do as a workout? How do I think about these? Great question.
I mean, probably yes. I guess that could be the answer. Yeah, I think that's it. I think there's like a big discussion we could have and we'll have today around choosing races, planning your race event ride schedule. We try and expand this because so many of our masters aged athletes, you know, we have athletes going from, you know, the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, 60s, even the 70s. And we always laugh, our late 60s and 70-year-old athletes are often thinking, you know, okay, that was it, no more racing. And then they often come back. We just had someone reaching out about Leadville at 72, I think it was. So, you know, this sort of the range of endurance athletes and these goals are growing all the time. It's sort of an exciting period. And so in that way, this like standard periodization, you know, that might be a Joe Friel training Bible book or Tudor Bomba way back with periodization is sort of like the I don't know if that's the original book, but that's like a big book that people read to get into periodization. There's this idea of prioritizing races in your schedule. And so they're sort of prioritized around these A races or main races or peak races, you know, whatever you want to call it, your big bucket list race of the year. And then they'll talk about the number of peaks in the year. And so you'll see like a single peak year, which might be like a traditional Ironman type year where it's big, long base phases and gradually you do that one race, that one big race, and that's the whole season's based around it. And then you might have a double peak where there's 2 races. That might be like a spring classic and then maybe cyclocross racing. And then you could have 3 peaks. And that's usually sort of like the most you'd see, but it gets very fuzzy, and sometimes it's like these models are only so usable. Certainly periodization in itself can be, you know, is overdone. Even that base build that thing that is so big in Joe Friel and cycling is sort of, you see it really slipping away in a lot of ways, but I think it's also got utility to sort of like hold on to. So it's one of those things you don't want to throw it all out just because you can you're allowed to include intensity year round or something like that. Or you might have a long season, right? That would be the other reason to not do it. So I guess, I don't know if I asked the question there, but that's like a preamble.
Yeah, that was a very ambly preamble.
Okay, well, I mean, it's like, it is what it is.
So I think, yeah, it's interesting because cycling doesn't always lend itself to this like A race peaking situation. Like if Leadville for the mountain bike is the goal, then sure, yes, there's a very obvious clear peak here. But a lot of people don't have necessarily a race like that. And here's where I'm thinking about even like pro cyclocross or pro mountain bike, right? The World Cup is your, like, those are your A races, right? Yeah. Like, but that's every weekend. So, you know, your kind of traditional peak model of like one A race or maybe two A races that are separated by month just kind of gets like tossed out the window. So I think all of this is like a little bit of a, yeah, like you said, kind of very loosely held sort of system. And also, I think it's actually more a mental system than a physical one necessarily. Like, it's not that you're doing something like so different for your B race or your C race than you would for your A race. It's more your A race, you're psychologically, you're maybe making a little more space for it. You're maybe taking an extra day off work to like get yourself in order. You're, you know, you care more about it, but it's not that you're showing up less prepared for a B or a C race.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a good way to think about it. We you know, even that peaking idea, right? Peaking's very debated. If we're going to say that periodization is debated, peaking's probably more debated for a variety of reasons, which, you know, someone could ask that question another week. We could talk about that. But the idea there, you're right, is that for our masters athletes, we talk about the A race is that Leadville or nationals or the big stage race you're doing or whatever. It could be a Fondo, it could be bike packing, the big bike packing event. And these events are the ones that you're going to read the tech guide as soon as it comes out. You're going to have your bike, you know, ready. The key workouts you're doing in the months before, you're visualizing for that, maybe trying to get to a similar type of terrain. This would be like Molly's Leadville, where like we uprooted our life in many ways and based it around like really, and again, people will have degrees of this, but I call this the working person's peak. We try and get to the race site early, not like Molly got there for altitude, but I always talk about John Barnes because I like to talk about, you know, John's one of our like top masters and, you know, now he's 50, but still a tremendous competitor, great racer, but a teacher and a father and does all these other things in his life. And so I always tell a story of we'd take John, we'd throw him in the truck because we were on the same team as well for a while. And we'd take him for like a week, and every day he would just get stronger and stronger because he wouldn't have to be at work. He wouldn't be chasing around these kids, you know, doing all this extra activity. He would just be riding his bike every day, which even that is different. And then he'd sleep. He'd sleep for like, you know, 10 hours because, you know, as adults, you know, chasing people around, they don't get to sleep. So John, by the end of the week, would just be just like, you know, on top of it, he was super energetic, sleeping really well, in the zone because he's been riding every day and around like, you know, elite athletes and the race site and pre-riding even, you know, which maybe you don't get to do it. And then he would just smash the race. And so I think that's, if we're going to Leadville or anything, half the benefit, if not a lot of the benefit, the working person's peak is taking the workout, taking the family out, which sounds offensive, but, you know, just some of those responsibilities. And the preparation is actually that you're in the weeks before doing everything you need to do with work and family so that can happen. And it might be a day, it might be a week. I don't know what it is, right? But it's that to me is like the A race is like you are changing and you know, doing work to arrange your life around this. And not everyone's going to get that. And that's completely fine too. So we can speak towards that a lot of people probably only have B and C priority races.
Which also, side note, totally fine.
Do we want to just quickly talk in that? I think this is a Joe Friel thing, but it's probably in a lot of different things. So A is that like what I just described. There's either like changing and peaking workouts or just, again, like your life is oriented. You're really paying attention. Molly talked about the mental aspects of it. B is more like I would think of, you know, just a lot of races where you know what's coming. You take a little lighter week the week before. You maybe do openers the week before. This would be like you were saying in cyclocross season. Most of those are sort of Bs because you are changing the week around it. C priority races, again, in this definition, would be more like for a lot of people, it might just be the weekly Saturday group ride. You're going to the shootout in Tucson or whatever your local like weekly race series. Even weekly races would be like this. You're not really changing your week to week. You still will do the ride on the next day. You're not doing a ton of preparation. Like you probably were at work and then you threw the bike in the car and then you went there or something. That would be a C priority race. So, but you still slam it out because it's weekly world championships. You still work really hard, but you're not really, again, you were at work all day. You try and do your best with your fueling, and indeed you're learning, you're going through the motions, but it's just, you're not orienting your life around it. And again, you probably will do the long ride on Sunday versus a B race. Usually you wouldn't necessarily, you'd recover before and after type thing. So those are sort of like the ABC that we're talking about.
Yeah. And I think what's interesting to me in them is that you'll notice that the actual like in race doesn't really change from race to race. Like when the start gun or whistle or whatever blows, like to me, your A race, your B race, and your C race are almost exactly the same in terms of how you're approaching the actual race itself, like when you're in the race. Partially, like, so I think a lot of people hear C race and think like, oh, this is like a casual, fun, like, yeah, results don't matter. Like, I don't care how I do. I'm just going to kind of like bop through it. To me, that's actually not a C race. To me, that's an event you're doing. But I wouldn't even put it in my list as a C race. To me, a C race, like, and a B race, they're practice for the A race where you're still racing. You're still doing all of the things that you'd be doing in your A race. It's practice for the A race. It's, whether it's the psychological or the gear, or the fueling, or even just the effort. Maybe you're focusing on different things. In a C race, maybe you're like, okay, this is the time I'm going to try the tactic of going with the guy off the, lead lap, and I might blow up and it might not go well, but I'm going to like make the effort. It's experimenting. But it's still very much, we talk about that phrase, race if you're going to race. I think a lot of people misuse or construe the C race to be like this, oh, I'm just doing it for whatever, for fun, like casually. I don't care about how, like, trying in it. But to me, I'm like, no, like the point is to try. The point is that it's practice and like a chance to test out maybe some different stuff. But you're still giving it the same like mental effort, I guess.
And again, I think these are all pretty flexible to whatever you want to use them for. I think you can change it. So if it is the weekly group ride, that's great. But I think Molly's correct that the reason you're going out and calling these an event or a race is because you're going to try really hard in front of people at a certain time of day. You're going to perform. And I think that's like we always want to keep that definition of performance versus, training. Are sort of different things. Performance is showing up at a certain time and doing it in front of people and saying like, that's what I did, and that's nerve wracking, but that's performance, right? When you think about it, when someone says the word performance, you're thinking like on stage, and that play happened at a certain time. And so you can go out and do your 20-minute intervals on your own on a hill, but that's not a performance. And then you'll see people, this is, another related topic though, but is that idea of like everyone tries to perform all the time. This is where CrossFit got a bad name, with everyone's putting the numbers on the board and we can all see your time for the CrossFit workout. And then that got messy, right? Because it's like you're performing every day. People are driving themselves into a hole every day, and then they're not getting the benefit of a workout, which is not maximal and not in front of people and is flexible on when you go and when you do it and that sort of thing. Did we get all that? So C race, I think that's the idea, right? Was that, you want to race if you're going to race. I think that's an important piece with it. But again, it can be a little flexible. And Molly's mentioned the experimenting. I think that is what those C and B races are for. We talk about not doing new stuff on race day. And so those C races especially might be a time where, okay, I'm going to try what is this, the not new, but new supplement everyone was drinking with the soup?
Oh, the sodium bicarbonate.
Yeah. So maybe that would be, you've tried it a bit in training for intervals, and then you want to try it on your C race because you think you want to use it in the A race, but you don't want to get the poops in the A race. So you try it in the C race, and then maybe the C race is close to home and you can, your friends won't laugh at you too much if you poop your pants or something.
I also really want to call this out, like just to go off on sodium bicarb for like 2 seconds. So If you listen to our podcast regularly, you know we just had Kylie Van Horn and Zoe Rahman from the Your Diet Sucks podcast. Super fun episode. Definitely go back and listen to it. They're runners, and they're very in the sports nutrition space. Like, they are like very committed to, you know, what's new, what's happening. Cycling is so weird and so niche and just so bizarre that when we pointed out the like, oh yeah, and then you like eat a bowl of sodium bicarb, they're like, ha ha ha, who would ever do a thing like that? And we're like, oh no, this happened at world championships. Like, this cyclist did this. And it's just, so funny to me that cycling is like so weird and bizarre that we've completely normalized. We're like, yeah, and then you eat a bowl of sodium bicarb, and we're being completely casual about it. And then anyone who's a professional in any other sport is just like, what are you talking about?
Yeah, cycling does get away with a lot of weird stuff.
The less said about that, the better.
And sometimes you don't get away with it. So, ABC. So I think we had a couple other things that are sort of related to that. I think that's sort of the main idea. And again, you sort of take your year and do it. And so there's sort of this like, what is it? So we sort of hopefully have told you what it is. And that's sort of built into, we're building the season. There's this base build competitive season, which sort of gets to, you were saying sometimes season, it's not just an A race, but a season. And I think that's completely fine too. In some of the models, you know, that aren't cycling oriented, base build, I just use those, you know, that's what cycling tends to use because of largely Joe Friel. But you'd see like, I really like accumulation, which I can never say that word smoothly. Utilization is how you can sort of flip between those two. Like, are you using the fitness or are you accumulating, right? And people get caught in that. They always want to push the TSS up and the fitness up and the power up. And it's like, no, at some point you're in the using fitness phase of the year. So I sort of like that too, and then what's the other one? I'm blanking on the other words that people use. There's another one that's sort of, like general preparation, specific preparation. So that's like base and then build, you know, so build would be like specific. It looks more like the sport. Base is more general preparation. So those in just like global periodization for any sport, more of the Tudor Bomba sort of stuff. That would be words you'd hear is like GPP and then specific preparation, I guess SPP. And then you would get into competitive phase of the year. And so that's a really nice sort of 3-phase model as well. And that's maybe describe more what you're talking about, where these C and B and A races all happen, or most happen, in the competitive phase. Maybe in the specific, you'd put like the odd C race or something. Like, it's not always super clean. But that would be the way to sort of phrase this, is that then you put those races in that part of the year and you want to arrange them. What is the so what we talked about? What do you do with this information? Well, when you are planning your season now, what phase are you in? Or is it all mashed up? You know, are you Zwift racing now and fat bike racing? And that's not wrong, but you do want to think, you know, what is the strategy here, and am I getting the results I want? I always say you can do whatever you want, but if it's not working great for you, sometimes it's worth reviewing this stuff. Like, are you giving yourself a chance to accumulate and focus on training and not performing, and then switching over to performing? And that's, you know, to go to the next level for a lot of people, there's a bit of discipline with that sometimes, right? Like, do you want to get on and get the Zwift kudos? You may.
Yeah. And I think what some people also miss about some of these like C and B races, and I don't know if we're going to kind of dig into each of them and stuff, I think what people miss is going in with a plan. So I've now mentioned experimenting a couple times, and, you know, Zwift racing can count in that C race thing. I think what's, to me, about C races you need to be thinking about is like, what do I want to get out of this race? Is it that like I said, do I want the hard effort? Do I want to try to stay with them on the first lap? I know in Zwift, do you want to go with people off the start, even if it like burns you out in 5 minutes and you're off the back?
I think so.
Yes.
I think in Zwift, yes.
Do you want to try this new fuel and see if it works when you're going at your absolute limit? Do you need to test these new shoes to make sure that they work when you're, going really fast and really hard or whatever? I think a lot of people just put a bunch of races on their calendar, and they maybe know instinctively which race is the A race, which race is sort of B race, C race, but they don't actually think about what to do with the B race and the C race. So they're just kind of like doing them as just races, but there's no like learning that comes from them. Or it's like kind of this last second or like even in race, like, ooh, let me try this. But but that's not really a great way of collecting information and testing like it's not a very like scientific method for it, right? Like when you're talking to clients about doing, whether it's the weekly race or they have this like, casual gravel grinder race coming up and they have Unbound in 2 months. What are you talking to them about doing during that more like B or C race?
So in the preparation, yeah. And so you'd be going through the motions, right? I think that's the idea. But like, I think it's still, you see that with Leadville, certainly there'd be like these qualification races people often do. Not always, but often you'll do a 50 miler before the 100 miler bike race. Maybe also for running too, right? You do something like that, like a shorter version of it. You don't need to replicate the race, but something that's going to give you some feedback on, your pacing, the fueling, the nerves, just how everything's working. Do your tires work in that scenario? Are you happy with all that? So it used to be people would go to Wilmington, Whiteface, or just any of the Leadville qualifiers, and then they go. But I think that's also hinting around this idea of you want to do a race before the big race. That's sort of a general rule of practice. Not everyone does it, especially with those bucket list races. There are people who will train away and then go to the race, and that's their only event of the year. But in general, you'd want to have a C or a B, a less important race to start your season. That's, I think, a good practice. If you can avoid it, don't start your season with the most important race of the year. Now we can talk about how you would deal with some of these spring classics there aren't really races beforehand, especially if you're not willing to do a lot of traveling. But that would be what you'd often do. There'd be like a state race before the nationals race, or again, like something in the couple months even before with these bigger 100 miler things. You didn't really have a ton right before your Leadville, but you did.
I did the race here at Blue Mountain, the Summit 700.
In July.
And that was what I would actually consider, like kind of my B race, just to get on the start line and kind of, kick off the dust a little bit.
And for running, and I think this is probably fair in biking, but that's where the lines between that accumulation, like is this training racing, sometimes that gets blurred, but in your like running, often it's just easier to do, if you're going to do your biggest weekend, a lot of times like 4 or 5 to 8 weeks out, then that often is better in a race, right? To do it. And so that, is that a C race or are you doing it for training? You can probably tell yourself whatever you want in that case. But sometimes it's like logistically, it's easier to jump into it.
Running also, like there's just so much pounding on the body, right? Like if your A race is a marathon, you're damn well very likely not doing a few marathons to like gear up to a 2:30 marathon or something.
Well, people might, but again, this is where it's like, you can do lots of things, but what's sort of the dose that's optimal, I guess, would be the question.
Yeah, I mean, in a lot of cases, most even like pro marathoners only do a couple a year. Yeah. They do some shorter races to get that speed in. But yeah, similarly, you don't do a 100 miler to train for a 100 miler. Mm-hmm. You maybe do a like 50 or 50K or something. And that's, this spring, that's one of the things we've just added into our schedule is probably, stopping in Colorado so I can do a 50K in April because I have my first 100 at the end of May. Mm-hmm. So it's not that I even need the mileage because I can happily do 50 miles in the woods by myself on a weekend. It's that I need the, start and finish line and that kind of pacing and stuff.
Yeah, no, the volume is very interesting. It's very, very common. Do I need to do the race volume before the thing? That's a very common question. And most people say, oh, of course not. But then it is like a very common question. But then you'll see things like, your coach David set the Leadville record as his first 100 miler. So like he had never run 100 miles and then he ran the fastest 100 miles at Leadville. Right.
If ignorance is bliss, is possibly, yeah.
It could be. And then he went and did another 100 mile and he did great. And so he's like, obviously has world class, like he's great and works really hard. But I think it gets to the point that, these people, another example, I think Sophia Gomez Villafante, yeah. Sorry for that. But Sophia, who won the Lifetime series now a couple times, I don't think the year before last year, I don't think she did. She posted she hadn't done over a 6-hour ride. Maybe she did one before Unbound, which is 10 or 11 hours? 11 hours, I think, for the women. And again, she somehow got through the race at the front of the race. And so I always use this as like a thought experiment because us as normal people, do we need to do more than the race distance, or do we need to do 10 hours or 7 hours? Everyone does these 200K rides now, and it's what do we, you can do whatever you want, but do you need to do it to do a good job? And I think what it's pointing to is no, but it does ask, you need to do those things. Do you know how to pace? Do you know how to fuel? There is a bit of unknown as you push into that. And then over time, this is why experience in races is probably predictive of outcome, is because, you screw up in races. I think that's the implicit thing, that experience is performance enhancing, is that you start learning these lessons by doing the sport, right? We say complete before you compete.
Mm-hmm. Okay, here's a question for you. So say my A race is this race in May. Let's just put that as my A race, because it's a race.
This is the Sulphur Springs
100.
Okay.
Yeah. So let's just call that my A race, because that's the one I know. It's, the one that I'm most familiar with and ready for.
It's a great event.
Great event.
At the finish to Paris to Ancaster, which a lot of listeners are familiar with, but it's a
Super
running
fun.
race.
So say that's my A race. Could I then, if that goes, whether it goes well or poorly, I guess actually, could you add another A race to your calendar after your A race is over? How does that work? I know you talked about you can have a couple A races in a season, but if I, win Sulphur Springs, do I add Tally in the Valley as my next A race? Assuming it's on the calendar and it's downgraded to a B.
Right. So
can I upgrade it to an A?
I think you and athletes I work with will know that I'm shuddering about the idea of adding races last minute, but that's not what you're saying. You're saying months later?
I'm saying, my calendar has 100 miler in the end of May, the end of July, and then the beginning of September. So depending on how the May one goes, at the moment, I'd say the May one is the A race and the other two are kind of B races.
Mm-hmm. So again, strictly speaking to the system of this, you could plug that into a calculator, in Training Peaks, the annual plan, or into, you could do it pen and paper using your Joe Frill training Bible. And so the idea with the A race, and maybe this isn't apparent, is that after the A race, it's you're peaking. So we've talked about this, a concept of you step off the peak rather than falling. So you would usually take a down rest week or a transition week, and then you would do some sort of training before the next A race. So this is maybe a couple base or build or accumulation, whatever we want to call these phases. You wouldn't want to go right into another competitive phase necessarily. There should be some sort of rebuilding that happens because you've taken a deload or a transition week. So I think those spacing you had there probably would be okay to say I'm going to peak for all three of these. You tend to see 3 peaks is a lot, but could you focus on all 3 of those races and that's your season? I think you could be okay with that. Yeah, I don't see a huge problem with that. I don't know why you wouldn't start with that as the objective, but I guess you could say that the middle one's a B, and then that way you sort of continue your build towards the September one. That might be more clean. And again, it doesn't mean that you're not ready for the middle one. You just maybe aren't coming down off of your load so much between them. It would be the main difference. Again, you're psychological. You might not be, as reading every tech guide and going there early and pre-running the course even. Whereas those A races, you might go and actually, for what it's worth, it's sort of weird to run these things because some of them are lap courses. You're going to know them well enough. But, it's just crossing off every possible, detail. And then by pre-running it even, you might learn, you don't get lost. What are the ways that this could go wrong? Well, I twist my ankle. So you learn all the places that there's, because you're in the darkness a lot of times, right? So it's just, what do I need? What are the turns that I need to know? Really knowing the course. That would be with the A race, you're just trying to minimize all the things that would make it go poorly. Mm-hmm. With the B, you might show up and just run the 100-miler.
Right.
So all that to say, right? And then that way you can sort of just like run it. And the thing is with the 100 miles, you're going to still have to take rest.
It's still 100 miles. Yeah.
Yeah. So it gets messier, but hopefully that makes sense. But I don't know that your question was like, if it goes well, would you change?
Not would you change, but just like, I think there's like a lot of people that have an A race early on in the season and then kind of like hit a bit of a now what? And I guess like my question is like, how do you add? And I think you just kind of spoke to, you do need to still like come down off of the peak if the A race went well. You do need to step off that peak and then build back up. There's a reason that world championships happen once a year, not like And a lot of the times, you know, you see the people who win world championships, even if there's a World Cup the next week, they don't do as well at the World Cup because they put all of their emphasis on world champs.
And that's what makes those type of schedules so demanding. It's just you're racing all the time. And so that's almost like a little different. But again, I think you would almost treat those as B races. But then again, these are shorter races often, which are easier to recover from. Cycling is easier to recover from than running. You know, 100 miles is just going to really be a while till someone is good to go. And that's the tricky thing with all of this, especially cycling, because you can get going again, is you'll see people out the day after Leadville, like, you know, crushing the training, right? And, you know, they can do it, but there's obviously going to be things like neuromuscular fatigue, fueling issues, all these things that may not prevent you from pedaling, but you're just missing those top gears. You're missing these things. Your body is depleted. And so whether it's you don't ever get those VO2 workouts to get the top end spinning again, and you start slowly getting worse and worse and worse despite trying harder and harder, or is it something that manifests down the road as a stress fracture or a bone, you know, you have low bone density because you didn't allow for these periods of rebuilding. You know, that's really where some of these models are. Can you get away with it? Probably. But then the question is, if we don't follow these, you know, rules of thumb, this is where it's tricky down the road. You know, like there's a reason we take rest days and rest weeks. You know, yes, is it arbitrary that we do it sort of roughly every Monday and every 4 weeks? But no, it's sort of like a built-in thing to try and avoid catastrophe. And we could be more specific sometimes, but then the question is always like, do you need to be more specific than this for most people? And probably not.
Okay, my last question that I can think of. A, B, and C races. Can you have just A and C races in your season? Can you just have B and C races in your season? Can you just have C races? Like, do you know what I mean? Do you need to have all three categories, or can we mix and match?
No, I think you could, like I would say in the last year, did I have an A race last year? Not really.
No, I'd say you mostly had B races.
I would say I was not prepared. I was reflecting on this because this year I'm hoping to be much more like training consistently and prioritizing my training and yeah, like showing up at a couple, you know, really prepared for them. I would say the last bunch of years, I've talked about this, when you have experience and the goal is well within you, you don't really have to, you can show up and sort of do it. Now, are you doing the absolute best? No, but I wasn't in a position that I could put time and energy into the racing the last couple of years. And so like wasn't putting in that extra 10% of effort, you know, 10% could probably more than that to get, you know, is it a percent better? Like it's that, you know, 80-20 or whatever you want to call it, where I wasn't, you know, necessarily showing up with that goal. Like in the way that we went to Leadville for you, that was not present in my year. But I had some great races. And I would say, so were they C's or B's? I don't even know. I guess
B minus.
I would say I probably had a lot of C's. That's tough. I would say that the first two gravel races, I showed up like a B. I was prepared. I pre-rode, even for Eager Beaver, I came down
And the point is, like, it's not bad to not have an A race or to, you know, not have B races on your count. Like, I would say, like, I don't have B races on my calendar. I have A races and then I have a C race.
So the question with all of it is you can do whatever you want, but if you're not getting the goals you want. So, like, I would like to do better. You know, and I'm at an age now where, like, I need to push pretty hard to get up into the main group to be there. So that's what the goal is this year, is to get even a little further up. And so that's where then the training comes like that. And then again, these like extra little bits on the racing and the gear and all this stuff has to come. So yeah, I think that's the idea. So I think you could have C's for sure. You just race locally for fun and, you know, you try your hardest, but you don't really put a lot of time into it and it's not a big deal. I think that's very common with the C's. You know, for a lot of people, you spoke
you can also be like very athletic and be doing the C thing and like fully training with a coach and just doing C races.
Sure.
Like that's, you know, depending on like you have a lot going on at work or at home with the family, so you can't travel to races. So you're kind of like doing the local stuff and you just don't have the headspace to like really give a crap about your like results.
No, I mean, I still did intervals every single week and, you know, did, you know, as much as I could do my long rides, like I did most of it. It's just, it wasn't the most important thing. And yeah, I showed up and worked as hard as I could. But then, yeah, it just really didn't, if it went well or not, it wasn't a big deal. And then I got back to training. And again, that to me is the main thing, is what did the training look like in the week before and then the week after? And mostly I would just keep my rhythm and then do the race and then, resume training. The B race question, I'm struggling. You said, could you have Bs? I think Bs and Cs, that would be like a normal competitive season. So that would be, in a lot of athletes, that would be sort of the most they'd get. They wouldn't get to that reorganize your life, working person's peak type week. I think if we're honest, for most people, that's the nature of it, right? Even if they go to like a national championships, or they, even some of these bigger, Leadville's just hard to do like that. You've reorganized your life if you've gone there.
We know a lot of people who went to, say, the Chicago Marathon. Actually, a ton of people from Collingwood went to the Chicago Marathon, and I would say, it was an important race for a lot of them, but they brought their families. Like, they were out on the ferry doing stuff like the day before the race. They didn't get to do the working person's peak of that. Like, it was still an important race to them, but like, I wouldn't have called it an A race necessarily because of the circumstances.
I think you're right. You said it right at the beginning of the episode here that, some of this is mental and what you need to get through. And so I think I'm okay with you calling it whatever you want. But that's how I usually think about it, is just, again, the training's like, just affected by it. And again, you're really organizing your life around it. I think those are sort of like the qualities of that A race.
That like kicks the B race up into A race territory.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you're really putting it on the line. That's like, to me, that's like a big part. I had something around that, sort of this idea of, maybe another ways I have two things. So we have number of races in a year as a common related question that we should cover. And then the other thing is, I'm going to keep forgetting it. Let's go with number of races. I keep blanking on it. But so number of races in the year. And so again, this was super variable. You'll have World Cup racers racing every weekend, or like a Pro Tour racers, like number of race days look it up. Like the number of race days for Pro Tour racers is, I don't know, a lot, hundreds. It could be 100, not hundreds, but 100. It could be a lot. And then if you did the whole World Cup mountain bike schedule, that's 2 races a weekend. And then there's all the extra like national sort of level ones. There could be a lot there. Now, for masters, people who are working and have families, the number of 12 always struck me as a good number. I think Steve and I came up with this years ago, and I think we were looking at like marathoners and like the number of sort of races they did, but I don't know. It's somewhat arbitrary, but if you look at the number of weekends in the year and the good weather weekends, and then you cross-reference it with what your family's doing and that sort of thing, 12 weekends is just a lot. So sometimes I account 12 as, if you're doing like a short track race and then a cross country race. That's not everyone, but there's lots of these things where there's like sort of 2 races as part of the race weekend. Maybe we count that as one race. I'm okay with that, and like fudging it a little bit. We can maybe fudge whether a weekly race is a workout or an event, depending on the person and how rallied, or how riled up they get for the event. But I think 12 is a lot. 12 is a lot of races. So I think just if you're really north of that, and again, not achieving what you're looking for, that would be the so what with this whole idea of ABCs and the competitive season. And then if you're really lower than that, and then you struggle with tactics, you struggle with race nerves, this would be where those C races, the so what now should you do? Well, then this might be adding in some more weekly races. It could be Zwift races. There's lots of things that could look like a race if you just made them a little more, I'm doing this at 10 a.m. on Saturday, and 2 of my friends know I'm doing it. My family's going to ask how I did in the race or something like that. I think this virtual world could let you do that, but I would probably prefer it look more like whatever your A race is. So if you're a mountain bike racer doing nationals, you're doing the weekly race and you're just throwing down on a Wednesday. These could start adding C races into your calendar. And I think for a lot of people who don't have race experience, we talked about that being important, that's going to just really propel your racing forward because you're just gaining experience. What happens when the guy goes and you jump on the back, And so this is stuff where the priority and the number of races are sort of like an interesting metric to just look at for yourself. Not that I'm judging you if it's 72 for you and someone else is 2. That's your life allows those things. But then again, you might want to be like, well, looking at this year, should I do more or less than what I've done in previous years, or the same, right? Whatever the answer is completely fine. But that can be an interesting metric, perhaps more interesting than the Strava how many days were you active type thing or whatever. Sometimes those race numbers are actually sort of like interesting to look at. And again, it could be events, it could be bike packing ordeals that you've gotten yourself into, days on the road. There could be lots of different ways you could phrase this, like what we're calling races here, but just anything like that that's sort of more of a performance.
Love it. Okay, was there anything else?
Oh, yes, but we might have to pause for me to remember it.
We might have to come back to that. Okay, I think the last point that I have on it is, we say it again and again and again, but as you're planning your calendar, to your note about number of races, look at what else you have coming up, what else is happening in your life, because we talk about this all the time. The person who has like the work trip the week before Leadville, the family vacation, the week right after their big race where they're going to be like hobbling through Disney World. Just making sure that the rest of your life is also accounted for, especially if you're like low on the number of races from last year. And you're like, okay, I got to add some more races this season. If you just heard that and you're like, yeah, let me just sign up for 10. Please, for the love of God, check your calendar and make sure that you're not, stomping all over the rest of your life. I know, I have a book launch pretty much the week after my 100-miler in May, which is great because I'll actually have the time to do the launch stuff because I'll be in, a couple weeks of like low volume recovery mode. Mm-hmm. Same, like I finish the other 100-miler in September. We have a book launch the week after that, okay. Which is like a little questionable, but
I was going to say there's some athletes I work with where it does have to be this, something else is there that almost prevents you from running or riding. I think the dream world is that you'd go to the spa and get massages every day, but I don't know that that's real life for most adults. So again, when we think about the A race, it's more that you've removed some of that other stuff for a day or days or a week. And then, yes, the next week, that stuff's coming back in. But we can think about that as other elements or goals of your life, roles of your life, come in and fill those next few weeks while the running is, in some cases after 100-mile, it would be weeks before you're even running, mm-hmm. let alone doing workouts again, anything with intensity or volume, right? Like it might be, I got out today and did like a run walk for 5 kilometers or something.
Yeah,
it
exactly.
might not be a lot, right? Your volume's down. So I think that's an okay idea. I do, as you say, there's a little bit of, do you need to do the most stressful thing? But
no, but you also do need to life happens. We do need to work that stuff in. I guess where I'm also going with this is like C races might not be super stressful or super like, oh gosh, this is going to take up, this is like taking up all this brain space, but it does take up physical, like it does take up time. It's still going to mean you have to drive to the venue and do the race and come home and you're still going to be tired after. Mm-hmm. So just because it's not like a high priority race, it might still be a time consuming thing. So just like making sure that you're like thinking through like all of your other competing life priorities before you stack your race calendar with a bunch of C stuff. Because I think if you overdo the C stuff, then your A races suffer, your family life suffers, your work life suffers, etc.
Mm-hmm. And perhaps you could add the, if you're going to use these A, B, C, and again, you can sort of like manipulate the meaning of them. But I think the C should be pretty easy to get to. And that's a little privileged that some people live beside a mountain bike thing. We don't, but we live, in an area that you could get to something that would look competitive. I don't know, like once you get to that, I'm driving an hour or two and it's a whole day thing for me to be at the races. It's probably a B. You're investing that time. You should probably recover before the race and do it. So I do think for most people, those weekend events end up being more in looking a bit to me like a B. Which only means, you could probably find some sort of definition that would say like you should only have 2 to 3 A races at most. So like never will you see more than 3 really. But I think adults, like it's often like 1 or 2. And then the B's, there's probably like a limit on the number of B's. We're not going to say that today. You can do whatever you want. But again, there's sort of like a number of weekends in the year and you want to be a little careful with that. Now I have recovered my memory here somewhat.
Oh, fantastic.
So you're doing Paris-Dancast, you're doing Barrie-Roubaix, you're doing, I would say Unbound falls into this a little bit, but depending on where you live, early race, it's winter, it's really crummy or there's no races to get to or you're really busy, you can't get to your race. So there's lots of these situations that could arise for different reasons. What do we do? Peter said, don't do your A race before. You got to do a B race before, or a C race before, a practice race before. So I think obviously you could do races that look like these races. Certainly something like Unbound. I don't know that most people need to race before that as much as they probably need to be out on gravel using their bike and testing the tires and eating the food and riding for an extended period of time. You could also use Zwift races if this was something like Paris to Ancaster. That would probably make sense, right? Something that's an intense gravel race, around whatever it takes, 3 hours or something. That would be the other way. And then certainly just a group ride. Try and get together a group of people who want to do that beforehand. If you can't get to a race beforehand, I think that's probably okay. And then sometimes it is just that's the nature of it. But then I do find with some people it is also just reviewing like, do we want to do that race at all? Maybe we choose a different race next year, and this is where we can learn from our past. Or what I always used that Spring Classic for was it wasn't mountain biking, but it was really hard, and it gets you outside. Probably on a day you wouldn't usually ride outside because it's very crummy sometimes, or a lot of the time. So that can actually be the C race, and then you would pick another race after. And that's okay too, right? You can still go participate, but you're not so married to the result. You're going to work really hard. You're going to try your best. You're going to go through the motions. But it maybe is the setup for another Spring Classic or the first mountain bike race or the whatever the thing is. So that would be the other way we can sort of edge into the season is sort of like that. If you do find that you're in this predicament where it's like, oh, I was hoping that was going to be my A race, you could manipulate things a bit. And then the only other thing I'll mention is when we think about these seasons and the planning of the season, we do often, we look at 2 years a lot of the times, but you could look 4 years, like the Olympics, sort of a quadrennial, they call that. And why do we do that? Well, you can't fit it all in. We said maybe only 12 weekends or 12 races at most, maybe, if you want to limit. So, but what you could do is you could say, well, maybe Leadville isn't this year, but I'm going to go do something like the Lutsen or whatever, right? A Vermont 50 or something like that. And you're going to do a 50 miler, but that's all in service of the 50 milers could be the A race. And then next year you're doing this 100 miler, or maybe this year you're doing a 100 miler on flat or like not at altitude, next year at altitude. And so we're always thinking about this journey where even the A race is feeding into the next season and the next races, the experience of it all. And so you can sort of give yourself space to say, well, this year isn't the year for that, but next year I'm going to do that. But what can I do this year that sort of will help make that even better, right? What can I learn this year that will make that better? Sometimes that can even be a complete event. I'm going to enter Unbound this year, and it's going to be a C race. It's going to be super hard C race, but I'm just riding the 200, which is how most people ultimately approach that, either as a result of they get out there and they realize they're just basically riding and surviving, or they actually just enter it with a more playful sort of like adventurous mindset. I think that's what the Unbound started as. So, and then they do it and they say, okay, well, next year, now I have a little bit of context for how fast I did. And this is always dangerous because now you have an expectation, but then they go back with a little bit more information about tires and the length and the fueling and the mistakes they made. And then they often do great, right? They go back and they say, I'm going to beat the sun or whatever the goal is, beat my time last year. So thinking about that periodization as we're thinking about ABCs as not just this year, it can also be a multi-year thing, right? Because that's, the time will go by anyhow. So we may as well use it in sort of like a more seamless way, a more thought out way. Would that be a demure way?
I don't know.
Is that a word?
Did you just start following? Did you just get on TikTok the day it got banned and you're just catching up on the trends?
Very demure.
Oh, Lord.
Have you guys heard about this?
Oh, my God. Okay, we're done. Head to consummateathlete.com to check the show notes. Follow us on Instagram at Consummate Athlete. Hit us up with any questions, thoughts for upcoming episodes, etc. We have a lot of really cool guests coming up this spring, so very exciting stuff. As always, happy training, and we will see you next week. Thanks so much for tuning in to the Consummate Athlete podcast. If you want to hear more training, racing, and endurance sport advice, make sure you subscribe to the podcast and leave us a rating and review. You can also subscribe to our newsletter at consummateathlete.com for a weekly dose of inspiration and advice straight to your inbox.